The following program contains scenes that some viewers may find disturbing.
ניינין, do your homework tonight, okay?
I will.
My mother never left the house, ever, for any reason. But she did that night.
And Mom will be back soon, okay? Okay.
I had to go to work. ניינין was going to sit down and do her homework.
Seriously. I will.
It wasn't important to lock the door. It wasn't important to make the windows secure at night. It was important to listen to Bruce Springsteen. That's what we did. So that was my sister in the room. See, she wasn't just killed, he obliterated her. Work ended at 10 o'clock. And, you know, I went the back streets home in my Mustang. Kind of unwinding from the day, listening to the rock and roll. And I thought, boy, that's a great song. I'm going to listen to it for a minute. But it wasn't over. But I turned off the ignition. I walked the 10 or 12 steps to the front door. The door was ajar. The same song was blaring in the radio. The lights were off. The living room was an absolute disaster, and the first thought to my mind was, I'm going to kill ניינין for leaving the house this dirty.
ניינין?
I continued to my bedroom, thinking, what is that smell?
ניינין?
Walking down the hallway was the longest walk. It was just a heavy, heavy feeling. You know, I've never felt that before. Very unnerving. I get to my room, and I flip on the light, and I did the room circumference, and then I got to it, and I did not know what it was. And it was red. The smell was the most horrible thing that you can think of times 10. And I am screaming and screaming, running out the door, running to the neighbors, pounding on the door. She answers the door and I says, I'm not sure, but I think there's somebody dead in my room.
The neighbors call 911 and try to calm down terrified 16-year-old Deanna Grymes.
I called my mother on the telephone and I said, Mother, come home.
When Adams County Detective Doug Darr arrives at the crime scene, what he discovers will haunt him for life.
When I got there, I looked in the living room. It looked odd. Things were out of place. And in the kitchen, we see blood on the floor and blood on the refrigerator. Started moving down the hallway. There were blood spatters up and down the wall of the hallway. Looked into the bathroom, and the sink had a lot of blood on it. The fixtures had a lot of blood. It seemed fairly obvious that someone was trying to wash blood away. Take a couple more steps, and there is the bedroom. A body was lying on a waterbed in that room, deceased. The bed had been punctured a number of times, and it was lying in 3 to 5 inches of water. That is likely the worst crime scene I have ever seen. I went outside just for a moment to kind of collect my thoughts and my emotions before I went back in.
Deanna is also struggling, trying to come to grips with a horrific scene in her bedroom.
I was thinking all I saw was a penetrated waterbed filled with red and a rib cage. That's the Grateful Dead shirt. That's my shirt. So that was my sister in the room, in my bedroom, crumpled over, completely unrecognizable. See, she wasn't just killed, he obliterated her.
Gwen Grymes, the victim's mother, arrives home to find her house sealed off by police. A parent's worst nightmare.
I jumped out of the car and tried to go into my house. It was surrounded with police, and still nobody's told me what happened.
My little mother, I thought, was gonna knock that cop over. She was going into that house. I was in the front yard, and she looked at me and she said, "Deanna, what has happened?" And I said, "Nini's dead." She said, "You're a liar. Nini is not dead."
I didn't believe it. I mean, how could you believe something like that? It isn't something that your mind can grasp.
The victim is just a child, 15-year-old ניינין Grymes. To her big sister and her mom, she's known as Nini.
Nini was a very soft soul, very kind in her heart.
Always the quiet one, the helpful one. She always wanted to sit on my lap.
She was just so cute. Beautiful, big brown eyes. She was growing up, maturing, wanting to make friends, start a job, get a boyfriend, do all the things that 15-year-old girls do when they're starting high school.
As far as speculating on anybody harming Nini, not a clue in the world. Nobody would have hurt Nini that we knew of.
Veteran detective Jim Wilborn joins Doug Darr in the hunt for Nini's killer. Outside, they discover a trail of blood. Can the blood lead them to a suspect?
Along the edge of the house was a water spigot with a hose on it, and there was blood on that where the water had been turned on. We found a couple of kitchen towels with blood on them. We went across the edge of the back of the house over to a fence. This was a 6-foot wooden fence that the individual apparently climbed up on because there was blood on the fence.
So I crawled over the fence and started to follow the blood drops. Our offender had a pretty good wound. We followed them across the street and to the back of a business. We anticipated that whoever was responsible was trying to stop the bleeding. And that's where the blood trail ended.
The blood trail is a dead end. Detective Darr turns to big sister Deanna, hoping she knows something that can help.
We were trying to determine a time frame that the murder actually occurred. whether she saw someone or anyone. Every little bit of information that she had the potential to make a difference in the direction that we went.
They're shocked by what Deanna has to say.
That night, I was sure I knew who killed her.
Thornton, Colorado is a small working-class suburb north of Denver. Back in 1980, more than half of the people here are under 18. And for them, the week after Labor Day means just one thing.
It was the first week of school, and it was Nini's first week in high school.
Are you actually nervous?
It was really an exciting time. School supplies, right? New clothes and new friends.
The Greims family's excitement over the new school year turns to unbearable grief when 15-year-old ניינין is found murdered. Her sister, Deanna, believes she knows who did it. Her mother's boyfriend, John Hastings. Detective Wilborn takes the tip seriously and rushes across town to question Hastings about the murder of his girlfriend's daughter.
John Hastings wasn't real popular around the house. We wanted to take a close look at him.
He was described to us as a guy who liked to drink some, a man with a rather volatile temper.
Oh, this man I didn't like, and Nini really didn't like. They had been fighting on and off for years. John was an a-hole. I blamed John. I blamed him right away.
His relationship with Gwen's daughters is toxic, but is it bad enough to lead to murder?
I was convinced at that point that one responsible for this crime was hurt. Hurt during the course of committing the crime. Whoever we were looking for had a substantial injury, probably to an upper extremity.
Wilborn checks Hastings for any cuts, but he's clean. There's not a scratch on him. And he claims he was with Нійнін's mother the whole evening.
John worked at a drive-in on the other side of town, so I picked him up from work, and then I drove him to his house, which is in South Denver.
It's supposed to be a quiet evening together. It's the first night Gwen leaves her 15-year-old daughter alone at home.
Gwen was with him that evening, and she certainly stood up for him and accounted for his time.
I didn't need to go out that night. I was just bored. And we stayed there until Kiana called me around 11.
You expect him to call?
His alibi was solid. His story was solid. He was with Gwen. He didn't do it.
With their first and only suspect in the clear, Adams County Police comb through a house stained with violence.
The clues are in the crime scene. We want to collect every piece of information that we possibly can, and if you're not careful, you can miss it.
We started looking very closely at what we had to work with. There was a lot of blood that was around the body, around the headboard. The blood came out into the hall, went into the bathroom. There was a lot of blood around the sink.
In the bathroom, a mysterious fingerprint. And someone else's blood, plenty of it, is all over the house.
We had great physical evidence in the form of the blood and the partial fingerprint.
We knew that we had enough preserved physical evidence that if we ever found the right guy and we were able to make the comparison, we're going to get that guy. We started checking the local hospitals to find out, did anybody come into an emergency room needing treatment for a hand or arm injury?
By morning, police find no one suspicious at any of the local hospitals. They need to approach the case from another angle. Dar and Wilborn try piecing together everything that happened in the Grymes house, leading up to Naynin's murder.
That day I got home the same time the girls did. It was really nice, because my girls were really good and they were just fun to be with. They were close. They were just really close. They were like twins. They were close in age, and they had each other their whole lives to live with, grow up with together. Well, that day, the whole day, I spent making Nene a new dress. They liked my homemade clothes much better than the ones we bought. She never even got to try it on.
The day after the murder, an autopsy reveals the sickening details of Naynin's final moments.
Nadine was ultimately determined to have died of multiple stab wounds. 86 injuries were found on her body.
How do you stab someone 86 times? I don't know. 13, 14, 15, 16. Who does that?
Some of the wounds were very, very deep wounds, and there were a lot. She had defensive wounds. She fought. She fought hard. There were wounds along her side, coming around to her back, and we speculated that she was being forced down that hallway at the end of a knife.
In my mind, there was some kind of sexual motivation involved in this crime. The shirt that she had on had been cut from the top down and opened up and exposed her breasts. And then there was a white handkerchief that ultimately was laid over the top of that.
She's 15 years old. What could a young lady like that have done to infuriate somebody that much? Not a thing. It's senseless. That was the day when we said, not giving up on this. Gonna stay after this until it's done.
What makes Naynin's murder even more frightening for Wilborn and Dar, they see a similarity to the murder of another young girl 8 months earlier.
Kathy Boyer is a 13-year-old young lady who was killed in a place we call Belroth Park. Belroth Park is a little more than a mile away from where ניינין was killed. Kathy Boyer died from stab wounds, about 30 of them. We wondered, did the same guy do both of these?
If it is the same guy, there could be a serial killer on the loose. Detectives ask Deanna and Gwen if anyone suspicious has been by the house. Deanna says they've been getting strange, anonymous phone calls. The calls start around the same time a man named Brian Shutter first shows up at the house.
Brian Shutter was a repairman who had been to the house and repaired the wash machine just a day or so prior to that.
He was in the house to do some work, and he was a friendly guy and was very friendly with the Grymes family.
Shutter takes a special interest in ניינין, and in a bizarre gesture, he offers her money.
Okay, thanks.
He flipped Nene a 20, which was a lot of money in 1980, to go to a concert.
Police wonder why a complete stranger would give a 15-year-old girl money. Is he just trying to be nice? Or is he driven by a darker motive? One day after the murder of 15-year-old ניינין Greims, Adams County detectives Dar and Wilborn are worried they have a serial killer on their hands. One who preys on young women.
The news media picked up on this and ran with it right away and asked lots of questions that obviously we didn't want them to know until we found more pieces.
As fear spreads through the community, Dar and Wilborn close in on suspect Brian Shutter. They find him at the appliance repair shop where he works. While searching his vehicle for weapons, blood, or any clue that might link him to the crime scene, they come across a possible murder weapon.
When we ultimately tracked him down and found him, he had a pretty substantial knife.
Could this knife be the weapon used to stab ניינין Greims to death? Shutter claims the knife is just part of his toolkit. But Wilborn and Dar aren't convinced. So they send it to the Colorado State Crime Lab for analysis.
When it was submitted to the lab, there was no blood that materialized off that knife. His alibi stood up when we did the background checks on him.
It's not him. Brian Shutter is eliminated as a suspect.
Look at the nature of the assault. I know.
But detectives are pretty sure Ниейнин's killer is someone she knew. There are no signs that the killer broke into the house that night.
We looked at everything. We knew there was no forced entry. It meant that whoever had come was familiar with people in the household, was potentially let into the home, rather than having to force their way into the home.
Is it an acquaintance who showed up unannounced? Or did Ниейнин invite someone over? Police learn Deanna and Nini have lots of friends in common, and many of them have been to the house.
We had the trampoline, so kids would come over. I knew most of them. I think I knew them all.
The friends all seemed to know both girls, so they all knew each other.
Police don't suspect anyone from their close circle of friends, but can it be someone at Ниейнин's new high school? That's the next stop for detectives Wilborn and Dar.
It was our responsibility to check them all out, to interview all of those kids. We wanted to know whether or not Ниейнин was expecting guests during the evening, if there's anyone that she had been dating, whether there were friends that might come over to visit. We wanted to know all of it.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
No one that we identified was upset with her or had any kind of problems with her. Didn't have a boyfriend of any type that we identified. It was a typical 15-year-old girl going to high school.
6 days after Ниейнин's murder, family and friends gather to say goodbye to this popular young teenager.
It was a huge event. It was very big. School was canceled that day. All of the classmates were there. The school had sent beautiful flowers.
It's very hard. You don't send your child to school one morning and the next day arrange a funeral for them. I knew that day all day. I could feel, you know how you feel that tingling up your spine when something is not quite right. I guess it's called a premonition, I don't know. But I did know something was wrong that day. I should have stayed home that night. If anybody should have been hurt, it should have been me, not Ниейнин.
Got the photos from the funeral.
As the family mourns, detectives use this opportunity to widen their search.
We had a team of people who attended the funeral service in a covert manner. photographs, hundreds of pictures, as I recall.
Sometimes when someone's responsible for a horrible crime, they show up for the funeral service. They want to be part of that crowd. It was to look for people with injured hands and arms, because that potentially was the evidence we needed to break this case. And it didn't come.
1 month after the murder, detectives have no suspects. All they know is Naynin's killer is still out there, still a threat.
Rumors were flying, and people wondered, is there someone in the neighborhood that they should be afraid of? The answer is probably yes, because we didn't know who had done it.
Reluctantly, Gwen and Deanna move back into the house, terrified the killer will return. For them.
I had an old gun. I sat on the couch there with that gun in front of me, in front of the door. It was the scariest place in the world to have to be, because we had no idea what happened. Who was this person, and was he coming back?
Okay.
Deanna and I slept in the same room for a long time. I don't know how I'm alone.
For Wilborn and Dar, the case becomes personal. Their frustration grows as leads dry up, and the trail of Naynin's killer turns cold.
Over the years, working these cases, they kind of blend together. This one stood out because it was a 15-year-old girl that was a victim. And I had a daughter about that same age. It bothered me.
We had a responsibility, and it was huge, and we weren't getting it done.
Months roll into years. Gwen and Deanna are tormented by the lack of progress.
It's the not knowing that's the most disturbing.
Every day of my life, I was praying, who killed Nini? That was my mystery.
I finally reconciled myself to the idea that I might never know.
8 years after Naynin's murder, Detectives Dar and Wilborn's careers move in new directions, but they never forget Nini. They entrust her case to veteran detective Larry Peterson,
No, it's all here.
hoping one day he'll catch the break they couldn't.
I took the ניינין Greims case over in 1988 when Sheriff Dar and Captain Wilburn started getting promoted. And we'd always said, if we can come up with a suspect, the blood evidence is going to make or break the case.
I have never seen a more persistent, tenacious man than Larry Peterson. If I'm an offender, I don't want that guy chasing me, because he'll catch me.
As Peterson reviews the file, a new lead suddenly surfaces. A killer named Dino Salez has just confessed to a murder that Dar and Wilborn always thought might be related.
Dino Salez walked into the Thornton Police Department and admitted to killing Kathy Boyer.
13-year-old Kathy Boyer was brutally stabbed to death only 8 months before Nini and less than a mile away. Peterson digs deeper and finds that Dino Salez has a direct connection to ניינין Greims.
Dino Salez attended the same school as Kathy. He attended the same school as ניינין. I believe that he was acquainted with ניינין. Same as with Kathy Boyer.
Is Dino Salez the killer Adams County Police have been looking for?
You know why I'm talking to you here today?
Peterson confronts Salez, but he denies having anything to do with Naynin's murder.
I don't know who that is.
Peterson has a way to find out.
We had the blood evidence and the fingerprints that were at the scene. When we got the evidence back on Dino Salez, it's not him.
It's a bitter disappointment. It's not Dino Salez.
Both cases are unrelated, just two different people that did two different killings.
Once again, the trail of Naynin's killer goes cold. While they wait for police to solve the case, her family is transformed by grief and fear.
We dealt with it separately. I think Deanna got stuck at 16. She didn't act normal for a long time. It was really too hard for her to acknowledge.
Knowing her sister's killer is still out there, Deanna lives in constant fear, made worse by her recurring nightmares.
I could get really scared. I could see this monster coming out of the air conditioner and butchering me with a screwdriver every time the air conditioner turned on.
Deanna is so consumed with fear, she changes her entire identity.
My name was Deanna Greims, and I changed my name. I was hiding from whoever it was. Because who walks around stabbing someone 86 times?
Moving almost 1,000 miles away, Deanna hopes she can find a safe haven in Arizona. She runs, but she can't hide. Because it's here in Arizona, police pick up the trail of her sister's killer. "24 years is a very long time for a murder case to go unsolved. But time can't diminish the resolve of detectives to find ניינין Greims' killer.
My experience with homicide cases, you never give up. Of course, they may go dormant for a little while, but you never forget about them. You never give them up.
In 2005, Detective Larry Peterson has a powerful new tool at his disposal, the CODIS system. It's a database that stores the DNA profiles of criminals across the country. Whoever killed ניינין left behind plenty of DNA. Peterson sends in a sample of the blood found in the house, hoping there's a match.
It's a long shot, but then again, it's not. With the advances in DNA, who knows what's going to happen?
4 months later, Peterson gets the break he's been looking for.
A blood analyst from CBI calls and he tells me, we got a hit out of Arizona. Right on. It just threw me for a loop. And I got on the phone to Dar and Welborn. I told Dar, I said, you ain't gonna believe this. We got a hit out of Arizona on ניינין Greims.
I was dumbfounded for a minute. I thought, finally, we might get there. And so he went to work on it.
24 years after the murder of ניינין Greims, Adams County detectives finally have a suspect with a link to their evidence.
Yeah, Detective Wilbur.
Larry called me. He tells me a guy that was getting out of prison in Arizona, blood matched blood from our scene. He told me the guy's name was Troy Brownlow. His name just never came up anywhere.
And if you think of anything.
He wasn't even a blurb on the radar. He was the one that slipped through the cracks.
Police know the killer's name, but that's about it. Who is he, and why would he kill ניינין Greims?
Just because you come up with the DNA match, you got to be able to put him here first. You start doing background on him to try and figure out who this guy is.
Troy Brownlow is now 41 years old. Peterson needs to find people who knew him as a teen.
His friends says we couldn't believe it. He'd do something like this. He played sports. He was a class clown, and nothing that would even hint to the fact that he is capable of doing something like this.
His friends thought he was a great guy, but as Peterson digs deeper, he discovers Troy Brownlow had a darker side.
We talked to his ex-girlfriend, said he's a violent individual. He was convicted of theft in Arizona, and aggravated assault here in Denver. There was another assault in Arizona, and he was convicted of shooting his ex-girlfriend's piano after he pulled a gun. So he was in and out of jail.
Larry called me.
Hello?
And he said, we got a hit. And I said, give it to me. And he said, Troy, and I finished Brownlow.
Okay.
It was obvious. It was somebody I knew. It was somebody that had been to my house before. It was somebody that knew me quite well. It was somebody that I saw every day. It was somebody that liked me in second grade. So I knew it was Troy Brownlow.
I don't recall ever having seen him before. Deanna says he was at our house. I remember one day there were 3 boys outside. Deanna says one of those boys was Troy Brownlow.
At my 10-year school reunion, we have pictures of him sitting right next to me. Knowing what he knew.
How can you be more cowardly? How can you sit there knowing you've done this and be with these people?
Troy Brownlow's disturbing behavior doesn't end there. He's now living near Naynin's sister, Deanna, in Arizona. Is it a coincidence? Or is Deanna the intended victim all along?
We thought that maybe Deanna was targeted. She was a very outgoing person. She liked to date. The fact that it happened in Deanna's bedroom did play a part in it. So we thought that maybe she had been the target of the thing itself.
If it is Deanna he wanted to kill, she could still be in danger. Peterson moves quickly to have Troy Brownlow arrested.
I talked to the Pima County Sheriff's Office and told them to try and locate him.
Larry Peterson is the most relentless bulldog I have ever seen in my life. And he went to work, and he was able to obtain the warrant so that we can get Mr. Brownlow in our custody.
It doesn't take long for Tucson police to track him down and follow him to a local convenience store.
The surveillance tape says he's getting ready to move. And we didn't want to lose him, so we told him, we got the warrant, arrest him.
Brownlow is taken into custody. Detective Peterson wastes no time getting to Tucson.
My first interaction with Troy is I watched him for just a few minutes. And then I advised him of his rights. He had an injury on his right hand, on his little finger, up to his ring finger, and unless you were looking for it, you couldn't see it.
No idea who it was.
He said he was stabbed in the penitentiary in Arizona, which never could be corroborated. Then he says something off the wall. He says, it's not what it appears to be. And I looked at him and I said, so you know why I'm here to talk to you. He goes, yeah, it's something I should have taken care of 25 years ago. And that was it. That's the only conversation we ever had with Mr. Brownlow.
Brownlow is extradited to Colorado, brought home to face the charge he killed his schoolmate, ניינין Greims. He returns on what should be Naynin's 40th birthday.
I think she would have grown into a good person. She really wanted to be a veterinarian. Deanna and I might not have taken care of the animals, but ניינין sure did.
There towards the end, she was turning into who she would be as far as expression, her individual expression.
First date. Okay, I'm gonna write that into the next line. Okay.
I played the piano. She wanted to write the lyrics.
And I knew it was fate.
ניeinין was definitely coming into her own right before he took her from us.
Troy Brownlow refuses to talk to police, but can't resist telling his side of the story. While he waits for trial, he gives an interview to a local journalist.
Troy was willing to share with me his story. He wanted to tell his side of the story, and he wanted me to be fair, given the fact that he was being vilified.
Brownlow tells an incredible story. He was with ניינין on the night she was killed, but they were attacked by a man with a knife. Brownlow says he was cut in the scuffle. He manages to get away and save himself, but can't save ניינין.
I asked him if he had any regrets about the case, why he would not tell police about what he saw 25 years previous. He said, yes, I admit I was a coward. I should have called Deanna. I should have told her what I knew at the time. But he simply didn't have the courage to do so. He was adamant that he was innocent, that he had gotten caught up in something that he couldn't control as a 16-year-old kid. And he never really strayed from that account.
On the eve of the trial, a question begins to surface. Has the Adams County Sheriff's Department got the right man? It'll be for a jury to decide if Troy Brownlow is telling the truth. 25 years after the vicious stabbing of 15-year-old ניינין Grymes, authorities bring Troy Brownlow to trial for her murder.
When this case first broke, I think it was heavily covered by the Denver media. Most people had largely forgotten. And suddenly, in all of its gory detail, it was brought back to life a quarter of a century later.
On June 6, 2006, the trial gets underway, and the courthouse fills with the spirit of ניינין Grymes.
In my opening, I said, by God, she'd waited 26 years for her voice to be heard in court, and she's gonna have it heard today.
ניינין, do your homework tonight, okay? I will.
Prosecutors don't buy Brownlow's story of an unknown attacker. They believe the evidence points squarely at him and make a convincing argument to the jury.
We know that ניינין came home from school that day and started to do some of her homework. Her mother, Gwen, had gone on a date. Deanna was at work, so ניינין was home alone.
Troy Brownlow went to the Grymes household to visit someone. When he got there, he found ניינין. There was no need for her to be alarmed. He had been there before.
I think that he had worked up the courage to come talk to Deanna, found ניינין there alone. Yeah, that's right. Decided to make advances. Was rejected and was angered by that.
At some point, he made a decision to hurt her. She didn't win the fight.
She fought to live. And by fighting to live, she caused injury that ultimately helped identify who that person was.
He claims to have been there at the time, but claims, yes, I was there, but I didn't do it. Really? Tell me about the connection, 8 different locations of DNA hits throughout there. Tell me about your fingerprints on that bathroom faucet. Tell me about that. Now tell me again, you didn't do it. By the way, show me the scar on your hand. And it was there.
You know, if you can walk into somebody's house when you're 16 years old and take the life of a little girl and stab her 86 times, you are not a normal person. How do you live with yourself when you do that to somebody? I mean, good gracious.
On June 13th, 2006, the jury retires to consider the evidence. It takes them less than 3 hours to find Troy Brownlow guilty of murdering ניינין Grymes. He's sentenced to serve 20 years to life.
He killed her and then hid from it for 25 years.
We finally have justice. That's all we ever wanted.
I do need to say goodbye to my baby sister.
I think that the investigators took it personally. I think that they made a vow when they arrived on the scene and when they saw her. I think that they quietly made a vow that they would solve this case. And I think they stuck with that vow.
Until finally, there was some justice. And finally, persistence paid off. That's what I think happened.
What fuels me, it's the gratification knowing that you put the bad guy away. The victims deserve to have justice, and we're the one to speak for the victim. And it's all for ניינין, nobody else but her.
More than 30 years after her murder, her family can't forget ניינין as a sister and a daughter.
Deanna and I usually like to bring yellow flowers because yellow was her favorite color. From the first she could ever speak yellow, she couldn't say yellow, she'd say aloe.
May God take your soul.
You can't put it out of your mind ever. It just hurts. This hurt just doesn't stop.
I love you, Mom. I love you too, Dee.
You have to make all of it for the best.
What are we gonna call this song? Call it Nini's Love. Nini's Love.
In my mind, Nini's waiting for me, and she's very busy picking all the yellow flowers. And once they're counted, she'll be back for me.